I kept finding the same library book, always checked out before me, always by the same man. Then I opened it and found notes directed to me. I noticed it the third time it happened. I stood at the library counter watching the librarian scan the shelves behind her. She frowned slightly, typed something into the computer, then looked back at me. It was just returned, she said. Yesterday, actually. I smiled politely, pretending I wasn't disappointed, but something tightened in my chest. It was the same book again. Not rare, not popular, just a quiet novel tucked between louder titles. I'd come looking for it 3 times now, and every time someone had borrowed it right before me. Same name on the slip, Evan Hale. The first time, I hadn't noticed. The second time, I thought it was coincidence. The third time, curiosity won. When I finally got my hands on it, the cover felt warmer than I expected, like it had been held carefully. I opened it at random and froze. There was handwriting in the margin, small, neat, almost hesitant. This part always makes me pause. I glanced around the reading room, suddenly aware of how quiet everything was. I told myself it was nothing. People write in library books sometimes. It annoyed me, usually. I kept reading. Another note appeared a few pages later. I wonder if you notice this sentence the way I do. My heart beat faster. The handwriting was consistent, thoughtful, not careless, not bored. It felt intentional. By the time I reached the middle of the book, the notes weren't commentary anymore. They were questions. Do you reread passages too? Do you underline in pencil or just remember? I think you'd like this metaphor. You. I closed the book slowly. I checked the slip again. Evan Hale. I didn't know him, had never seen him. Yet somehow I felt seen. The next note was near the end. I always return this before I finish what I want to say. My throat tightened. On the last page, written smaller than the rest, was a sentence that made my hands shake. I hope you're reading this again. I sat there for a long time, the library breathing softly around me. I didn't know why someone would write to a stranger. I didn't know why he never spoke out loud. But I knew one thing. That book hadn't been waiting for me. It had been following me. Have you ever felt connected to someone you never actually met? I didn't plan to write back. I told myself I would just read the book and return it like any other. That the notes were curiosity, not invitation. But every time I turned a page, his handwriting felt closer, like a voice that had already learned my pace. I tried to ignore it. Then I reached a line he had underlined lightly. This is where I always slow down. I slowed down. I don't know why that mattered so much, but it did. I sat there longer than necessary, tracing the words with my eyes, aware of my own breathing in the quiet room. My pen was in my bag. I didn't take it out at first. I kept telling myself it would be wrong. The book wasn't meant for conversation. Libraries weren't meant for this kind of intimacy. But when I turned the page, there was another note. I never know if I'm reading this alone. That was when my hand moved on its own. I wrote very small, softer than his handwriting. You aren't. I stared at the words for a full minute before closing the book, heart pounding like I'd just said something out loud in a room full of people. I didn't write again that day. I returned the book 2 days later, earlier than I needed to. I felt strangely exposed handing it over, like I was giving away a piece of myself without knowing if it would ever come back. For weeks, I avoided that shelf. Then I checked the library system online. Checked out again. Evan Hale. When the book returned this time, I opened it immediately, flipping pages until my breath caught. Next to my words was a reply. So you do notice? I sat down without realizing I had moved. Below it, written more confidently than before, was another line. I was hoping you would answer. The rest of the notes had changed. They were no longer observations about the story. They were about the reader. I think you linger on quiet scenes. You probably read at night. I imagine you smile when no one is watching. My face felt warm. He wasn't guessing blindly. He was paying attention to how someone like me would read. Near the end, I found a note that felt heavier. I never write my thoughts where someone might see me writing them. I read that line twice. On the next page, there was space left intentionally blank. Waiting. I wrote again. Then why write at all? I returned the book the next morning. That night, I dreamed of a man sitting across from me at a long table, both of us reading the same book, neither of us looking up. When the book came back a third time, his reply was already there. Because this feels safer than being seen. I closed the book gently, realizing something that unsettled me more than the mystery. He wasn't hiding from me. He was hiding from the moment he'd have to speak. And somehow, through paper and ink, I had become part of that hiding place. Would you keep replying if words felt safer than meeting someone face to face? I started checking the return cart before the shelves. It became routine without intention. I'd walk into the library telling myself I was there for something else, then drift toward the desk, pretending to browse while watching for the familiar spine. When it appeared, my pulse always changed. The book felt different now, heavier. Not because of the story inside, but because of the conversation folded between its pages. I didn't read it at home anymore. I read it there in the same corner seat near the window. It felt important, like this place was part of the agreement. His notes had multiplied. They weren't questions anymore. They were observations. You always pause before this chapter. This is where I imagine you frowning. You read slowly when something matters. I caught myself smiling, then stopped, suddenly aware of how much he was right. I wrote back carefully. How would you know? 2 days later, the answer appeared. Because I read the way you do. That line stayed with me all afternoon. We began leaving longer messages, threading them through the margins. He wrote about the weather on the days he returned the book, about the sound of the library in the morning, about how he liked sitting where he could see people leave. I told him about the window seat, about how I liked stories that didn't rush to prove anything, about how I reread endings. Then one day, I found a sentence that made my chest tighten. I see you here sometimes. My fingers hovered over the page. I hadn't realized how deeply I'd assumed anonymity. The safety of not being watched had been part of why I kept writing. I turned the page slowly. I never interrupt, he had added. I just notice. That should have frightened me. Instead, it made me feel understood in a way that surprised me. I wrote back, why not say hello? The reply took longer this time. When the book finally returned, my heart beat faster as I searched the pages. I think it would ruin this. I sat with that sentence, feeling the truth in it. The notes were honest in a way voices rarely are. There was no performance here, no expectation, just words offered and received. But something shifted after that. His handwriting grew more careful again, smaller, like he was pulling back. Then I found a note tucked near the end. I've seen you reach for other books. I froze. There was no accusation in the words, just awareness. You don't write in those. I closed the book slowly, understanding something for the first time. This wasn't just a conversation, it was a boundary, a fragile space where we could exist without risk, without rejection, without being real. And for the first time, I wondered what would happen when one of us crossed it. Do you think some connections are meant to stay unspoken to survive? It was raining the day I realized I cared more than I wanted to admit. I had tucked the book under my arm, umbrella dripping, the streets around the library slick with water. I didn't want to think about Evan Hale, the man whose name I barely knew, yet whose handwriting had become part of my days. I tried convincing myself it was just curiosity, just words on a page, just a library habit I couldn't shake. But when I reached the corner seat, opened the book, and read his latest note, my chest tightened. I wonder if you'd laugh at this scene the way I do. I closed my eyes. The words hit differently now. They weren't commentary. They weren't observation. They were something softer, tender, something that made my fingers tremble over the page. I wrote back immediately, carefully, cautiously. Maybe I'd smile. I returned the book that evening, drenched and shivering, but my thoughts were warmer than my damp coat. For the next few days, I kept thinking about him, about how the notes weren't just words. They were pauses filled with attention, moments he had stolen from his day just to leave ink for me. The realization settled slowly. I didn't just care about the words. I cared about the writer, about the person who stayed quiet but spoke through margins. When the book came back, his reply was different. I'm glad you noticed. There was no pretense, no joke, just a sentence that carried a weight I couldn't ignore. And then it hit me. The reason he never approached me, never said hello, never let our paths collide in real life, wasn't because he didn't want to. It was because he had found a way to know me without risking rejection, without risking everything. I sat there with the book open on my lap, feeling the quiet ache of knowing someone so deeply, so carefully, and still not having met them. I wish you'd say hello, I wrote, my handwriting uneven, rushed. The reply didn't come immediately. I returned the book the next day, my stomach tight with anticipation. When it came back, I turned the pages slowly until I found his note. I think it would ruin this. I stared at it, understanding instantly. He wasn't hiding because he feared me. He was protecting something delicate, something fragile. The words weren't just messages, they were walls and windows at the same time, inviting, but careful. That night, I couldn't stop thinking about him, about how a man I had never spoken to had managed to enter my life so completely through paper and ink, about how safe it felt to exist in the margins, to know him without confronting the risk of reality. And for the first time, I wondered what it would feel like to cross that line, to meet him, to finally face the person behind the words. But fear settled in quickly. What if the magic of the margins disappeared once he became real? I held the book against my chest, the rain tapping softly against my window, and whispered aloud, I want to know you. Even if the world wasn't ready for us yet. Have you ever felt closer to someone through words than in real life? It was a Saturday when I noticed it. The book was back on the shelf, spine perfectly aligned as if waiting for me. My fingers itched as I reached for it, and when I opened to the first page, my name was there. Not in bold letters, not like a greeting in a letter, just small, careful, written in the corner. I think you'll like this part, my name. I froze. My heart thudded. Somehow he had known. Somehow he had known enough to make the words personal without ever saying them aloud. I flipped through the pages. More notes had been added, woven seamlessly into the story, responding to my own scribbles. I like how you underline things I never notice, one line said. Your question yesterday stayed with me, and another. It was no longer casual, no longer observation. He was writing directly to me. I didn't know whether to feel nervous or elated. I felt both. When I wrote back, my pen felt heavier, more deliberate. Did you mean for me to read this, or was it just for yourself? The next time the book returned, he had answered in a way that made my stomach twist. It's both. I think you'll understand the difference. I read it again, tracing each word. Understanding? Did he mean me? Or had I been imagining that connection all along? The margin notes grew longer. He began commenting not just on the story, but on me. You pause before this paragraph. You linger longer than anyone else would. You smile at sentences that aren't funny. I noticed. I couldn't stop smiling. Every line felt like a heartbeat. Every observation felt intimate. I tried to be brave. Why haven't you said hello yet? I wrote in my neatest script, underlining the words twice. Days later, I returned the book to find an answer that made me catch my breath. I think it would ruin this. I stared at it for a long time. I understood immediately. He wasn't avoiding me. He was protecting something delicate, something fragile. Our connection had grown quietly, safely, without the risk of rejection. And yet, the words made my chest ache. I wanted more. I wanted real. I wanted him. I carried the book with me everywhere for a week, rereading his notes, reading my own replies, and imagining him sitting somewhere, writing carefully, thinking of me. The library became smaller. The world outside shrank. It was just the two of us communicating through margins and ink. Then one day, I noticed a subtle change. His handwriting had grown slightly bolder, more confident. The sentences lingered longer in the margins, almost like an invitation. It terrified me. I was ready to meet him, but only if the magic survived. Only if he was exactly as patient and cautious as the person I had imagined from his notes. And deep down, I knew the next time he wrote, the book would not just carry words anymore. It would carry a decision, one we couldn't undo. Would you risk breaking a perfect connection by meeting the person behind the words? I couldn't stop thinking about the book. It wasn't just the story anymore. It was the spaces between the words, the pauses he left in the margins, the quiet way he let me exist on paper without ever speaking aloud. The next time I saw it, I opened to the middle and found a note that made my heart skip. Meet me where the rain touches the library steps. Tomorrow, noon, only if you want to. I read it 3 times, afraid to believe it, afraid to hope, afraid that saying yes would destroy the careful rhythm we had built. And yet, the idea of not going made my chest ache. I carried the book to my corner seat, my fingers brushing the pages, rereading every note that had led us here. He had been patient. He had been thoughtful. He had built a bridge from ink to me, and now he was giving me the chance to cross it. I wrote my reply quickly, nervously. I'll be there. The next day, I arrived early. The library steps were slick with morning rain. People passed by, umbrellas blooming like flowers, but I only noticed the book in my hands. I traced the cover nervously, wondering how this would feel in real life. Would he be exactly like I imagined? Would the careful patience in his writing translate to reality? I waited. Minutes passed. My heart thumped louder with each passing second. Then I saw him. He wasn't hiding. He wasn't awkward or fumbling. He was standing quietly, umbrella in one hand, book tucked under his arm like it belonged to him. His eyes met mine for just a moment before he offered a small, almost shy smile. I swallowed hard. The world seemed to pause. The library steps, the rain, the people rushing by, they all disappeared. You came, he said simply. I said I would, I whispered. We didn't rush. We didn't shake hands or hug. We just stood there, two people who had spoken for months through ink and paper, finally existing in the same space. He held the book out to me, open to a page full of our back and forth notes. I wanted you to have this first, he said softly, so we wouldn't lose what we built. I took the book carefully, feeling the weight of all the letters and pauses, the hidden conversations and cautious thoughts. I didn't want to meet if it meant losing it, I admitted. He nodded. Me neither, but I think some things are meant to be real, even if fragile. The rain fell harder, but it didn't matter. Nothing mattered except that moment. Words had brought us here, and now presence would carry us forward. I opened the book slowly, scanning the margins one last time, seeing his words now not as notes, but as an invitation. And I smiled, realizing that some stories aren't just meant to be read. They're meant to be lived. Would you dare meet someone if you had only known them through written words? After that first meeting, the world felt slightly different. The book was no longer just paper. It was a bridge we had crossed. Every note we had written had led us here, and yet reality was heavier, fuller, warmer than any margin note could capture. We met at the library often after that, not always planned, sometimes by chance. He'd be sitting in the same corner seat, head bent over a notebook, and I'd pretend to browse, heart thumping as if this was the first time. And every time I noticed small things about him, the way his fingers lingered over words he had written, the way he smiled when he realized I was watching, the faint scent of coffee clinging to his sleeves, the slight crease in his forehead when he was thinking deeply, I realized that words can tell you a lot, but only presence tells you everything. One rainy afternoon, I opened the book and found a new note in his handwriting. I wonder if it feels different now, seeing you in real life, not on paper. I smiled. I had wondered the same thing. I like it, I wrote back, scribbling carefully. It's more alive. He looked at me over the top of the page, his eyes meeting mine. A silent conversation passed between us, richer than any notes. Our margins turned into whispers, our scribbles into laughter. We shared small pieces of ourselves that never made it into the notes, and yet the book remained sacred. It was our secret, a testament to patience and care. One day, I lingered longer, noticing how he flinched slightly when someone approached our table. His quiet habit of staying cautious in the library had always seemed polite, thoughtful. Now it felt tender, protective. I'm glad we didn't rush, I whispered, almost to myself. He smiled softly. Me too. Some stories need margins to breathe. And I realized that our silence, once filled with hesitation and invisible words, had grown into trust. Every glance, every small laugh, every moment shared quietly on the library steps or at the corner table was a sentence we were writing together in real life. The book had been the first chapter, but this was the story we were living. Yet, even in these moments, I couldn't ignore the fragility. Meeting him didn't erase the carefulness that had built between us. He could still retreat, I could still doubt, and the magic of the margins could still vanish if either of us forgot how delicately we had constructed it. But there was a choice now, a conscious one. We could continue to let words guide us or let presence define us. For the first time, I realized that some connections are stronger than fear, stronger than hesitation, stronger than the distance between the lines. And in that library, surrounded by the quiet hum of pages turning and rain tapping against the windows, I knew I would choose him again and again. Do you think a connection built through words can survive when it becomes real life? Weeks passed and our meetings became a rhythm neither of us spoke aloud, but both of us knew. We didn't need to plan every encounter. He would be there with the book in his hands and I would find him, like gravity pulling me toward the corner seat that had become ours. Sometimes we didn't speak at all. Sometimes we laughed quietly, letting words hang unspoken between us, carried only by glances and small gestures. Then one day, I noticed something different in the margins. A new note, smaller, almost hidden. I never told you why I wrote instead of speaking. My breath caught. I read it again, tracing the letters with my finger. Why hadn't he told me? We'd shared so much through words, but there was still a barrier, a reason for his caution I hadn't seen yet. I wrote back carefully, my pen trembling slightly. Why? The book returned a few days later. When I opened it, I saw the truth laid bare in neat, precise handwriting. I used to speak too quickly. I said the wrong things. I scared people away. You didn't scare me, but I needed to be careful. I needed to find a way to know someone without losing them before I could understand them. I held the book close, reading the note over and over. Every word felt like a confession, like a soft exhale after months of careful breaths. I realized that every note he had written, every margin he had filled, every question he had left for me had been a way of protecting himself and me. I wrote back immediately, words spilling out faster than I could control. You could have just told me. I would have understood. When the book returned, his reply was smaller, quieter. I know, but words spoken aloud aren't always enough. Some truths need time. Some connections need margins. It was then I understood. He hadn't avoided me out of fear of me. He had avoided risking the magic we were creating. He had chosen patience over impulse, connection over clumsiness, and in doing so, had made every word matter more. I smiled softly, closing the book. I wanted to meet him in person and thank him, to tell him how much his patience had meant, but I also wanted to leave the margins untouched for a little longer. Sometimes I thought, the most important truths are the ones you read slowly, in silence, letting them sink in between the lines. That day I lingered longer at the library, reading and rereading, and tracing his words with my fingers. I realized that the notes weren't just messages. They were a map of his heart, carefully charted so I could follow him, step by step, without losing my way. And for the first time, I wasn't afraid of what would happen next, because I knew we were both willing to take the careful steps necessary for something real. Have you ever realized someone's silence was just a way of protecting something precious? It was raining again the day I realized we had to cross the invisible line. For months, we had existed in the library between pages, margins, and careful words, but the safety of ink and paper was starting to feel like a cage. We knew each other in ways the world couldn't touch, but we hadn't truly met. Not really. I held the book in my hands, tracing the notes he had written for me, wondering if this delicate balance could survive the risk of reality. And then I found a new note, tucked deep between chapters. I think it's time we meet outside the margins. My heart skipped. My fingers shook as I wrote back. Are you sure? What if it changes everything? When the book returned, his answer was simple. Some things are worth changing for. I swallowed hard, gripping the book like it was a lifeline. That afternoon, we left the library together for the first time. No corner seat, no open pages between us, just the rain, the steps outside, and the city stretching beyond. We walked side by side, quiet at first. The comfort of margins wasn't there anymore. Our words had to be spoken, our thoughts no longer safe in ink. I've imagined this for months, he said finally, his voice low, almost shy. And I don't want to ruin it. You already haven't, I whispered. Every word mattered. We laughed softly. The sound carried more weight than anything we'd written. It was tangible, real, human. At the cafe down the street, we sat across from each other, our hands finally free from the book that had defined our connection. I was scared, he admitted, eyes locked on mine. Scared I would say the wrong thing, scared I would lose what we built before I even tried. I understand, I said. I think I've been scared too. We smiled, the kind of smile that carries years of unspoken trust, the kind that feels like coming home. And then, without thinking, I reached across the table and touched his hand. The warmth, the reality of it made me catch my breath. He held it gently, as if afraid of breaking what we had. And yet, it was real. Stronger than any note, stronger than any margin. The book lay on the table between us, open but unnecessary now. Its pages were filled with words, yes, but also with patience, courage, and the careful mapping of two hearts learning to meet. I think we've been writing the same story, I said softly, just in different ways. He nodded. And now we get to write it together. For the first time, I saw him fully, not just through words, not just between the lines, and I felt the quiet thrill of a connection no longer hidden. Some stories start in pages, some start in silence, but the ones that matter always come to life when you take the leap. Would you risk breaking a safe connection to make it real? The next few weeks felt surreal. The book was no longer between us. It had done its job. Every note, every careful observation, every pause in the margins had led us here, to laughter that didn't need explanation, to glances that didn't need translation, to moments that were fully, undeniably real. We continued visiting the library, not out of necessity, but out of habit, sitting in our corner seat, sipping coffee, talking quietly. The world was still busy around us, but we were untouchable in our small sphere of attention. One afternoon, I opened the book out of habit, half expecting to find new notes. The pages were empty, clean, silent. I smiled. It wasn't abandonment. It was freedom. The book had been a bridge, and now we were on solid ground. We no longer needed the careful margins to communicate. Our presence was enough. He looked at me across the table, eyes soft, and said, You know, it's strange. We started with words, and now we barely need them. I laughed softly. I think the words made me brave enough to be here. He nodded. And brave enough to show you me. I realized then that the margins had been more than messages. They were lessons. Lessons about patience, about noticing, about letting someone exist in their own careful pace. Lessons about trust and about love that grows quietly before it blooms. We held hands without thinking, a simple gesture that spoke more than any margin note ever could. And yet, every time I passed the library shelves, my eyes flicked to the familiar spine, the book that had followed me, that had waited for me, that had been both messenger and confidant. I smiled softly to myself, because the book had been magic in its own way. Not the kind that bends time or changes fate, but the kind that teaches hearts how to speak without fear. The kind that shows how love can grow slowly, carefully, beautifully. I often wonder if he ever imagined this ending while writing in the margins. Did he hope I would find him? Did he believe the story would reach reality? I think he did. And maybe that's what made it special. Not the notes themselves, not the careful pacing, not the waiting, but the willingness to create something delicate and trusted enough to see where it would go. We left the library together that evening, the book tucked away in a backpack, no longer the center of our story. We walked into the rain, holding hands, talking, laughing, fully present, fully real. Some connections start in words, some start in glances. But the ones that matter, the ones that last, start when you finally cross the line between imagination and reality. And now, every time I open a book, I look for the margins. Not for notes, not for instructions, but for the quiet possibility that someone, somewhere, is waiting to notice the way I read. Because some stories, once begun, never really end. They only continue beyond the margins. Have you ever found a connection so real that it started on paper but lived in your heart forever?